Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another Labco Fitness episode, the Hobo Edition. If you're watching the video, then you'll see two hobos talking about sports science, calisthenics, and a lot of cool stuff.
That's right.
Josh,
Pretending
today
like
we're
we know what
talking
we're
about...
doing.
Yeah, well, what are we talking about today, Josh? There's a subject that you brought up that you thought was important to talk about. What's that subject?
Oh yeah, so we're gonna talk a little bit about like I'm air quoting here for people who are just listening, but like optimal training. Like, what does it mean to get optimal results, and how does your definition change the way you should go about it? And I think that's a really important question that really gets glossed over a lot. And I think it screws things up because we say stuff like optimal, and that might mean something different to every single person listening. So I want to kind of give what we call an operational definition. And we're gonna give it a couple different ones, because what's optimal for me might not be optimal for you, because I'm in residency. I can't do things like I'd like to do it. Even if I was perfectly healthy, it's just not going to work. So those are the kind of things that, we'll get into a little bit. And I think it's going to make some decisions easier for people, because I see a lot of, like, there's Spencer just asked like 12 hours ago that, he's trying to figure out what he needs to do for vertical pulling movement. And because he's like, I can only do 4 pull-ups. And that really is kind of like, I see what you guys say is optimal, but like, you have parameters set, or I have an idea of what I think I should do, but that doesn't seem realistic for me. What should I do? And so those are some things that we're going to get into, because I think it's important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
So
I think it's one of the most important things, and as life has gone on for me, that in the beginning of my years, I was capable of spending more time on training, and then throughout the last few years that has changed, and I had to prioritize differently, and then optimal, that definition also changed for me. And the cool thing about optimal and it's not suboptimal, but I would say optimal and slightly not that optimal is the amount of gains you make in relation to the amount of work you put in is
Right.
actually way out of proportion. But before we
Right.
get into that, I think it's important to let's start giving that operational definition on what is optimal.
Sure. So to me, the right definition for optimal is whatever is going to work best with your current life circumstances. And that's really important, because it leaves the door open for, if you're a professional athlete or you're an aspiring professional athlete and you have a lot of time, then what's optimal for you is not going to be saving as much time as possible. It's going to be, and it's not going to be spending as much time as possible. It's going to be trying to get the most possible gains in the shortest period of time, and, kind of without a whole lot of regard to intentionally limiting time. For me, I'm like, man, if I can get, 3 or 4 20-minute workouts a weekend, that's optimal for me. And I've got some limitations right now physically. So what's optimal for me is what's going to get me the most out of that time,
Right.
And so that's kind of what I mean, is that instead of saying optimal, like, ooh, maximum gains, I think maximum gains is maximum gains. Getting
Right.
some kind of gains out of the time that you have is also optimal for a lot of people, because there's people who are working full time in addition to going to school. Plenty of our members have, children and full-time jobs. And for them, it doesn't make sense to try and copy what, you were doing a year ago, or what I was doing when, I was like just a full-time college student doing, part-time handyman work. Like, I had plenty of time between classes to work out,
All right. So
but that's not real
recap
life
a little bit. So
for most people.
optimal training is training where you make the most out of the time you have
Yeah.
with the circumstances of life. Also, this includes the limitations you have to equipment, etc. So, optimal training is with everything that's available to you, including time. How are you able to get the most out of that time um, to get your gains? You know, to get strong. So,
Right.
that's
Right.
basically our definition for this podcast when we talk about optimal training.
Yeah, and some people won't like that, and that's okay. What what I would what I want to encourage is for people to recognize that, taking a couple of minutes and just thinking about, you know, what you really have time for without ruining other parts of your life, and what your priorities are. And it's okay to not have the same priority all year round. I mean, most people can dedicate like 2 or 3 months to a really like hardcore, like maximum gains mass cycle, and the rest of the year can really focus on, just sort of maintaining that mass and working on strength and, skills and things like that. And that's totally acceptable. That's essentially what professional athletes do, you know? And so that's not going to keep you from accomplishing things. And it doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to be able to make the fastest possible progress for you, but you're going to make progress. You're going to be happy. You're going to achieve your goals, and you're not going to have to give up as much in the process. The only thing you give up is, how fast you get to one particular goal. But that's okay when you're happier on the journey, you know?
Mhm. So, this also brings up another subject. I'm not sure if we should get into it now,
Yeah,
but I
and
think it's
it
interesting to bring it
also,
up.
the other thing that I
Yeah.
want to say about that is
Hmm.
that, when we say these things, we make it sound like there's almost no gains or there's a lot of gains. And so the truth of the matter is that, at least in the short term, like over the course of, say, 8 to 10 weeks, you're doing just enough to make some gains will get you about, like 40 to 50% of all the gains that you could get. The additional half of what's possible for you is going to take like 4 times more work, and this is borne out in research studies on trained and untrained people. Untrained people, it's honestly, there's a much smaller difference because they take so little
Yeah.
to get them, into high gear. And, but after you've been training for, a year or so, um, as you periodize your cycles and you say, okay, well, um, I'm going to do mass for the next 6 or 8 weeks or whatever. If you're just doing like, 1 or 2 sets, like to one rep in reserve, you're probably getting, at least 40% of the total possible mass gains you could get. Whereas to get all the mass gains that you could get, you might need to do, and I'm talking about like per exercise per session. So that might be 2 or 3 sets per session per muscle group, maybe 2 sessions a week. We're talking about
Hmm.
like 6 sets per week. For a lot of people, that's enough to make gains. And, they may make 30, 40% of the total gains with like, 6 sets a week for those, for those muscle groups. That's like 2 sets of pull-ups, 2 sets of rows, maybe, you know, and trying to think like some other shit. Who cares? Even doing something like that, if you're taking it to like one rep in reserve, and then you're going to get stimulus for hypertrophy if you're eating a small surplus and you're getting the protein.
Hmm.
And you're just not going to get a maximal response, but that's okay. You don't need a maximal response all the time, you
Yeah,
know?
and there is a risk to training for that maximal
Yeah,
response,
there's a
which
lot
could
of
set you back
fatigue.
even further. Yeah, but
Sometimes, yeah.
if you, let's say, finding that maximal response is something that is often also a little bit tricky,
Yeah.
because some people go a little bit overboard and end up
Yeah.
getting injured. It's a much finer line to walk on, and the annoying part about that is you're working on getting the most gains in the shortest amount of time, but you end up, if you end up getting injured, you end up being just as good as someone who didn't do that. And this is something
Right.
that's really tricky, and that's why top athletes have so many people monitoring them.
Yes.
This is why it's not always the best if you're thinking long-term strategy. It's not
Hmm.
always the best to be going for that 100%. And I think a lot of people miss
Right.
that. I think a lot of people don't realize how important that is, especially me, someone who has been injured many times. It's set me back a few years, I would say, even.
Oh, sure.
And
Yeah.
yeah, and
Uh-huh.
had I not done that, had I been just a good boy, that that would slowly just play the safe part and done that consistently, I would be very less I
Y-
would be
y-
less prone to injuries, which ultimately would lead to steadier gains and more gains
yeah. Yeah.
on a big picture.
Yeah. That's a really good point. And I think that I think the key, is that if you're in a time when you can put a lot into your training and it doesn't take away from other areas in your life, then or at least if you're happy about it, if it does, then
Right.
you know, then that's great, but that doesn't mean that you should go, balls to the wall and leave it all in the gym and whatever. It means that you want to do a guided session using our guidelines and do like a 6 week period where you are intentionally making kind of linear progression gains at a certain rate that's designed to take you kind of past your optimal point at some point during a 6 week period. And that's really
Hmm.
important because once you know what's too much, you can start zeroing in. And then if you start each cycle at a really low volume, which is part of what a deload is for, but it's also part of why, we start off
Mm-hmm.
on the low side and build up, then what you're able to do is teach yourself like just how little it takes to get gains, which is that first week even. And
Hmm.
then, you also start learning what you can handle. And
And that, yeah,
that
that's
doesn't
something
actually
very
change
valuable.
that much. Like, we think that it does, but like the and the key here is like not how much you can handle without being so exhausted you can't get up. I mean, like where your ideal response comes from doesn't
Right.
actually change that much. What does change is that you do end up building a very large, what we call like a physiological reserve. But what that means is that you kind of have a lot of room to screw up. And a lot of times things kind of get overdone, and this is especially true when people are trying to get strong. They don't understand that no matter how big or how small you are, your tendon attachment sites, they don't change size, and it takes years of consistent work for certain neurological inhibitory mechanisms to be
Hmm.
sort of dialed down. And there is no such thing as like, if I just work hard all the time, I'm going to get there faster. It's like, no, if you do things right and you send the right signals to your body and you just take care of it, you take time to let it rest every now and again, you're actually going to get there faster in the end because you're going to avoid injuries along the way. And you're also going to give yourself time to step away from the gym, to stay mentally healthy in a way that makes you like hungry for another hard cycle instead of saying shit's coming, you know?
And
That's really important.
yeah, I wanna,
That's something that James Hoffman does
yeah,
a wonderful job of really like talking about over at Renaissance Periodization, I think.
yeah, he does. Um, Something that I've noticed from our community when I'm looking at the Discord forum, etc., is in the beginning, a lot of people complain that the volume is, little compared to what they did before.
Right.
And then if you look at the people 1 year later, and they're basically saying, "Oh my God, I've made this much gains." And
Yeah.
then and the next question you hear other people ask is like, "How often did you get injured in the since you started doing lab code?" And this is I'm not trying to advertise anything, but I have yet seen anyone who has done the program to the letter, getting injured, and which is
Yeah.
really, which I don't think a lot of people realize how big of a deal that is.
Hmm.
Making consistent gains while not getting injured, that is basically a gold. That's
Yeah.
gold. If you can
That's
do
the
that,
dream.
that's the dream. If you can consistently do that, you're set for greatness when it
Yeah.
comes to training. It's
Yeah.
as simple as that. That is actually the only two things you need to do. You need to be able to make gains and not fuck up while making gains.
Yeah.
And
No,
if you can do
that's
those two,
perfect.
yeah, if you can do those
That's
two,
perfect.
you're basically set. And I don't think people realize how often athletes get injured. I honestly do not
All
think
the
they
time.
realize. Yeah.
They're just
And so
real
if
good at working around it, And the
that is,
thing
yeah.
is that by the time they get to a really high competitive level, they've
Mm,
already kind of weeded out the people who can't handle the schedule.
mhm.
It's not like everybody just magically gets great at stuff. Some people are more injury prone in certain areas, and you know,
Yeah.
there's a certain amount of natural selection that happens in everything, and even those people who are gifted, they've got aches, they've got pains, they don't care, so that doesn't register to them as like aches or pains necessarily, especially when they're young. But they've got some stuff going on, just like the rest of us. And
Yeah.
that's just that it doesn't matter because they're like, whatever, I'll still kick your ass. You know, don't worry
Yeah, but I
about it.
don't
Don't worry
think
about it. I got me. Okay. I got me.
r-
You just try to get to the goal,
right.
because it's not going to happen because you're not good enough. And
I
that's the
think
athlete's mindset, is that they don't care,
yeah.
and that's why the coaches are so important, because you,
Right.
you have
They
to,
care.
they need to respect the coaches enough to listen when the coach says, hey, I need you to dial it back a little bit,
Right.
you know,
And this is something
and not all athletes can
that
do that. And those are the athletes that often have shorter careers.
100%, 100%. One of the things that I hadn't sort of valued as much since recently, as of recent, is in a period of not being injured at all, like zero injuries. So this last macro cycle I did,
Hmm.
I basically did it completely injuryless, a full macro cycle with, I would say, 0% injuries, which is super rare, not even aches,
Hmm.
and that is something crazy to me because
Yeah.
I've never had that in my career. And
You always
I
did
don't,
too much. You would start feeling good.
right,
And
right. I would
you
feel
know,
good. Yeah, but the cool thing is, um, I'm sort of OCD. You know
yeah.
that, right? I'm
Yeah.
sort of OCD, and so when there's a list of something and it's written out, I tend to very much stick to that list. So if
Hmm.
it's very, clearly written out, I stick to that thing. And so I remember in my last few 3 skill cycles, I had the capacity to do 10-second full planches, etc., etc. I remember training with my friends, and they would see me hop into a full planche. I would hold it, and then I did 2 sets, and I just stopped, and I just started moving to other movements. And they're like, "Well, dude, don't you want to try this? Don't you want to try that?" Like, I was like, "No, it's not on my program. I'm sorry." And it's as simple
Yeah.
as that. And even if someone wanted
Yeah.
me to demonstrate a full planche, I would look at my program and be like, I'm doing one tomorrow, so I can do it for today already, but then tomorrow I won't do it. So yeah, I'll do one full planche for you. And that's how I would do a full planche, whereas
Hmm.
before I would just put it on top of the training.
Right.
And I don't think people realize that when you're aching, you're a lot less strong than when you're not aching,
Yeah.
because pain does inhibit maximal production of strength. That actually does happen. And the best way I can sort of back that up is when I got COVID, during having COVID, I could do full planches still and it was completely fine. But then the inflammation in my shoulders started, and it
Hmm.
wasn't that I was weaker. I just couldn't do full planche anymore. I
Yeah.
was
No,
way too weak.
your body is
Then,
going to try and protect
right.
itself.
Then I took the turmeric that you told me, which,
Oh,
by
yeah,
the way,
yeah,
I
yeah.
haven't told you the results of that, but I'm going to do
Mhm.
now. I took turmeric for 2 weeks. Joshua basically told me I needed to do
Yeah,
that.
people
I did
don't
that.
don't think I'm going all weird and holistically
Yeah.
bullshitty.
We'll
Okay,
explain it in a
we'll
second.
talk about this. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll explain it in a second. I did that. The inflammation disappeared. Full planche is back.
Mhm.
So it's not like I just magically made more gains in those 2 weeks and now I'm able
Right.
to do full planche again. It's
Right.
pain. The pain is gone. The inflammation is gone. My body is now giving me permission to exert more force. It's simple as that.
Yep.
That's why people with adrenaline when they're in that
Hmm.
fight or fight response, they're
Yeah.
suddenly much stronger, and that's
Yep.
because that the whole circuit is being surpassed.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's why
Exactly.
being not in pain is such a great thing to have in life.
Hmm.
You should appreciate it.
It is. I
But
mean,
let's talk about the turmeric, though. I think people are
sure.
like, "What the fuck?"
I'm sure they heard that and were like, "Whoa, hard stop." Especially if like any of my medical people are listening, they're like, "What the fuck?
That's what I thought
Damn
when you
it,
said it to
Naderman."
me.
And here's what I have to say. When I say turmeric, you know, we're talking about very specific approaches to a specific problem. In this particular case, we're looking at trying to sort of modulate an abnormal inflammatory state post viral in nature. And you know, we know that with COVID, with sepsis, you don't. It's not your typical inflammatory cascade. It's complex, and there's a lot of things going on. And trying to target one small part of the cascade usually doesn't work as well when a lot of different things are going on. It's one of the reasons, why we have to take different approaches to specific diseases with specific medications, even if they're all quote unquote inflammatory. Is that there's in some of these diseases, we know for sure that there's certain parts of the immune system that are acting up. And post COVID, there just seems to be a lot of different things going on. And one of the broadest spectrum, not the strongest, not the most ideal for everything, but one of the things that is true is that, like you have to remember that willow bark is where aspirin comes from. You know, poppy seeds are where morphine comes from, so on and so forth. The advantage of modern pharmacology is dose control and getting a specific compound when you need a specific result. The problem with a lot of the herbal compounds is that people say shit like, ooh, curcumin or curcumin or whatever the fuck that word is. Okay, I don't know the pronunciation. I always say curcumin, but curcumin, whatever. Put the accent mark where it belongs for me, please. But
I don't know,
it's
man.
it's a
We say curcuma in
yeah.
the Netherlands.
Yeah, no, I think it's a middle accent. Like I think it's curcumin, but
Yeah, yeah.
the important thing is that's a family of compounds. There's a number of different isomers in there that fall under that cat. I think there's like 12 or more within turmeric, and often these are not isolated out, so you don't actually know which ones are doing what. And in my opinion, we know that turmeric as a whole root is safe for human consumption. And and in general, when you have diets that have like more curry and things like that, where turmeric is a part of it, and there's other spices like ginger, there's a lot of these different compounds that have some cross reactivity and similar effects in some ways. But the short version is that we tend to see uh, less inflammatory related problems. That doesn't mean that they're a cure all or anything like that, or even necessarily preventative, but the they do have anti-inflammatory effects. They're very hard to, you know, like iron out. There's a lot of different mechanisms that, can be anti-inflammatory, and they don't all have to be insects. They don't all have to affect renal blood flow. We know that turmeric does not do that. That's been studied fairly well. And the nice thing is that you can get the whole ground root or you can get fresh root, and you absolutely will feel a difference.
Yeah, I can attest for that.
And the problem is that you don't want to do that normally. You need your inflammatory response to respond to exercise.
Yeah, that was my next question.
So that's why like young healthy people shouldn't do this. But when you have like post COVID inflammation, that's different.
Mhm.
You're no longer a young healthy person. You're a young person who's got an issue. And the issue is that inflammation is out of control, and that can cause serious problems. So why would I want to try and zero in on one small area using a drug like an NSAID, especially if that could potentially be cardiotoxic, you know, when things are already out of control and blah, 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 or renotoxic and whatever. Um, when we could take an approach that maybe wouldn't be the best for most other conditions, may not even be the best thing, for COVID, but we don't really know a whole lot. What we do know is that in general, whole turmeric does seem to help. And there are multiple mechanisms through which this works. And, it's cheap, it's easy to get.
Hmm.
And, so it had and it's like you do a little bit of a titrate to effect. Like, I don't want you to, I want you to find the, minimum dose that makes a noticeable improvement. And a lot of times that's somewhere around like, a half teaspoon to a teaspoon of the powder. And, you could split that up into like 2 doses a day or whatever, or, like a half teaspoon twice a day or something like that if something's acting up. And we don't even know if the problem with isolation chemistry is that you know what was demonstrated fairly recently, I know within the last 5 years or so, there were some new antibiotic compounds that were found that were a result of culture contamination. And so typically we try and find the one compound and blah, 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 because that's important. The problem is that, you know, you have, when you have complex, like nature is not an isolated system. And it's a lot of separate isolated effects happening together at once in sequence.
Right.
And so you have a bacteria that may put something out that is antifungal, but then another fungus absorbs it, processes it, and spits out something that they cannot make on their own. But that
Hmm.
after it's gone through, a couple of organisms in this culture, it suppresses something that might kill all of them. And so, how this happened, you know, we'll let people who care more talk about, but that's how things are. And so, there's a lot of things that are very hard to know because we try to say if this then that, but sometimes it's like if this and that in the condition of this, then
Right.
so you have
Yeah.
all these things that are coming together, and that's an
I mean,
area that's very, very difficult to study. So we don't know if other things in the turmeric outside of the curcumin chemical compound family are required for these effects to happen. All I can tell you is that it does help. And it's like, I don't want you to do it forever. I don't want you to do it for a
yeah, that
year.
was my next question. Why would someone not forever do this? You know,
I mean, the biggest thing is that it's going to get in the way of your response to exercise,
mhm.
for sure. I mean, like for you, it may just be moderating things out. And like the thing is that, you know, when you're looking at something like post COVID, where, you may or may not have like myocarditis and stuff like that, I don't want you pushing hard. I just want you to keep the inflammation calmed down where your body catches up and is able to sort of get back into its normal homeostatic, like, hopefully pre-COVID state. And
Right.
that takes some time. That might be 2 weeks, it might be 8 weeks. It's hard to say. I mean, I think that you can afford to do things for a couple of weeks and then start working back in and see how you feel. And if you start noticing things are off, then maybe you should back off again and try another,
So,
two
yeah,
weeks. And I
I
mean,
have an
you do that.
interesting.
And
I,
eventually you just notice it. Well, I guess I'm fine now. I
I have an
mean,
interesting question
that's the best
regarding
we got.
this. Yeah. So, uh, there's a point where an athlete is let's say big enough, right?
Hmm.
So let's talk about someone like Ola, for example.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
He's big. We could say he's
Hmm.
big enough, right? And these athletes, they don't really need much more muscle gains, but
Hmm.
they do need to be able to, in order to make the most skill work
Hmm.
gains, is to be able to do a lot of repetitions without getting fucked. Basically, it's simple as that.
That's
Without
that's
getting
only
injured.
that's only true to a point. They need to do
Yeah,
a
but
certain amount of
usually
quality
the
for motor
bottleneck.
learning.
Yeah, but usually the bottleneck is one of these, joints giving up on, or you're like overworking a little bit, so you need to deload so you can then you can practice full planche
Right,
again,
right, right, right,
right?
right.
And
Yeah.
so
So the
what if for
problem
these
there is
people,
programming.
Yeah, but my question is more: wouldn't turmeric or any anti-inflammatory push
No,
that a bit further so you could do
no,
more stuff?
no,
Okay,
it will not.
go through with me why that is.
Sure. Well, part of this is because, when you're doing something that's brand new, you're always going to have an out of proportion response to it. And that
Hmm.
includes inflammation. But as you repetitively exercise, your body adjusts its inflammatory response. It essentially is able to dial it back to where, okay, now I'm getting what I need, not something that's excessive. And
Hmm.
so you're already in a good place. And we find that you start seeing strength loss when you try and do too much of this, because inflammation is not all about growth. It's about response to exercise. Growth's only one response to exercise. You still need transcription that is mediated by, cytokines that are secreted by the muscle tissue, which we call, myokines,
Hmm.
but it's IL-1, IL-6, IL-10, IL-8, IL-13, blah, 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 blah,
Right.
blah, tumor necrosis factor. All these things are secreted and there's time courses to them. And so you have this pulsatile thing that causes a very, 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 very different response than a sustained inflammatory state.
Right.
And you don't want to suppress that spike. You need that spike. You need that spike to do everything from neural adaptations to the tissue specific stuff.
Okay, so
You
that
know,
includes neuroadaptation.
yeah, I mean, none of these tissues are really immune, and I don't know that we really have all the answers. What we do know is that you don't want to intentionally try and suppress inflammation to do more work, because you're still going to be activating enzymes within the muscle that are going to be catabolic. And the only thing that you're doing is you're limiting satellite cell response. And that's not
Hmm.
all about growth. I mean, they're the nuclei, they make the repair products. They also make the, like the chaperone proteins that are used to prevent breakdown when it's not needed,
Right.
and so on and so forth. You don't want to suppress that. So that's kind of what I'm getting at, is that, you know, the right thing to do is to learn when enough is enough. Um and there are only a couple of times when, you can make some slight modifications to this. When you get older, like 50, 60, 70, 80, our immune system is not as well modulated as it was previously, and there are studies showing that very low dose NSAIDs, specifically, just not all the time, just at the workout for elderly people, actually help their response to exercise.
Oh, whoa.
In a young person, it does the opposite.
Right.
It reduces the response to exercise. You know, and so those are things that are, worth looking at on a case by case basis in a consultation environment where you have the appropriate education and certifications to do those things. But
Hmm.
it would not be appropriate to start making recommendations for the general public. It's
No, no,
like,
no.
and
Yeah.
that's kind of what I'm getting at, is that even with that, you cannot out medicate a bad plan. Even with steroid users, you can't out medicate a bad plan. It's you have to understand how the drugs change your environment and what that means for, dialing in the results that you need without overdoing it. Especially when you have something that can let you overdo things.
Hmm.
And that's why, like, yeah, no, I wouldn't do that. Yeah, instead, I would absolutely consider having, some collagen supplementation at least a couple times a week. And
Hmm.
yeah, because that's not about, like, oh, collagen's better for muscle growth or blah blah blah. No, there are specific amino acids in, type 1 collagen that are not, like, glycine's not a huge part of whole proteins, but it's a very large part of collagen. It's like a third of it.
Hmm.
So you're the same thing with, like, proline, and like our body hydroxylates these things. There's more proline than there is glycine, I believe, in most of the whole proteins that we eat. But, like, for some of these things, a single 15-gram serving of collagen protein gives you more of that particular amino acid than an entire like day's worth, like 300 grams of like whey protein. I mean, holy shit. That's a no-brainer. It's not
Right.
about, trying to be weird and making stuff up. It's about saying, okay, you and I'm not saying all athletes need this either, but I think that as you get stronger, I think that it's probably worth thinking about. And I think that for calisthenics athletes in particular, and anybody else who is doing a lot of low leverage like low leverage exercise like planges, full planges, rock climbing stuff. I think that to a fair degree, wrestling and jujitsu. I think there's a point at which, maybe that's something to consider. I don't think that it's the first thing you should think about, but I think that it's something to consider because there are some advantages that, when you have everything else dialed in, you're just giving yourself a little extra protection. I think that that's worthwhile, I,
Yeah.
but not until you like the first thing is the basics. Get your training program right, get your basic nutrition right. When that stuff's fine and you've got creatine in your pocket, then you can start looking at other specialty things, but I think it's a mistake to try and spot treat before you've actually kind of gotten the whole landscape in order first.
So, what would you recommend for someone who is, let's say, is inflamed? Let's take my situation. I'm
Ooh.
inflamed. I took turmeric. It's a
So
few weeks later. My shoulders feel fine. My wrists
yeah,
feel fine. Everything feels great.
I mean, I
When
think you
should
can
I
start
build?
backing off,
Yeah.
and here's the thing, like a lot of the COVID post-inflammatory stuff lasts for, like 6 to 12 weeks.
Okay.
So I also wouldn't blame you if you just hung on to it for a couple more weeks and then decided to back off. I don't think that there's a, right answer. Um,
But there's a part of me that still thinks there is this well, let's say good zone, like a good zone to be in, where you take a amount of anti-inflammatory, whatever, what doesn't matter what form that is, but it's any anti-inflammatory, that when paired with training that does a lot of inflammation, um, there's this golden point where you are able to make on the long run more gains
I will say
and
this.
getting less injured.
It has never once been demonstrated in research to date.
Okay,
Not
fuck.
once.
Well,
And
sir,
and
watch me
and
do
and
research.
there's been a lot of effort because
Oh, so
anybody
it
who
is
is able to come
something.
up to that with a protocol like that would make a fucking killing.
Okay.
And what we
Yeah.
do know, no, seriously, like
Yeah,
the
you're right.
biggest.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I mean, none of it works. You know what works? Like people do spot growth hormone treatments. They do some weird stuff. Like there's risks with that. I don't think it's a good
Yeah.
idea.
Mhm.
Unless your life's going to change because of it. And I don't mean in your head. I mean like if your bank account's going to add 3 extra zeros to it. Okay, well maybe that's worth the extra risk to you. And I wouldn't
Yeah.
argue against it. I wouldn't. I wouldn't suggest it either. But I'm like, oh well, I can see why you're making that decision. Let's try and keep you safe. But the but
Okay, but that's fair. That's fair. I was just wondering
yeah.
because there's a lot of straight arm work going on, a lot of shoulder stuff. I was hoping, man. I had a hope. This guy had
Yeah,
hope.
I wouldn't look too far into that. Here's what I would do.
Right.
You want to keep a lot of vegetables in your diet.
Mm-hmm.
Seriously. I mean, it really does come back to the basics for almost everything.
Mm-hmm.
Is you do want a plant-based diet. That does not mean you don't eat a shit ton of meat. That's up to you. That's what you like.
Right.
But ideally, you have a lot of green leaves and you try and have a lot of different natural plant colors from actual plants, uncooked when safe, you
Mm-hmm.
know. Um and what trying to eat different parts of plants, broccoli, cauliflower,
And why?
asparagus.
Why do we have to do that?
Well, you don't have to, but
Oh,
we're
well, why is it better for you?
because there are chemical families from different fibers to different flavonoids that are present in some tissues but not in others. And so by
And
diversifying your diet, you're diversifying your gut microbiome. And one thing that we do know
okay,
from
yeah, yeah.
athletes in general is that athletes do tend to have less medical problems, and people with more diverse gut microbiomes tend to have less medical problems. And
And
we don't we don't know exactly why that is. What we do know is that your gut microbiome only eats what you eat. So if you're only eating a few
sure.
things, you're only supporting a very narrow population. If you're eating a lot of different things, you're supporting a much wider population, and
But what
that
about all
seems to
this?
be beneficial.
Right. And what about all this talk of people saying, "Oh, you should eat this or that and that because it's anti-inflammatory."
It kills me inside, man.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
It
I just
kills
want
me
to. I want to hear
inside.
your take. Why? Why is that?
'Cause I'm like,
Why is
oh,
that?
what
Or
the
like a
fuck?
carnivore diet
Well,
only. All these people like,
oh,
because it's so much less
dude. If you can't,
inflammatory.
if you're not, just know if you can only hear the audio, that my eyes are like rolling around at a mile a minute in my head. Okay. Look, here's the deal. Outside of having a lot of different plants, and believe me, that can fit into keto diets as well.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
the there there is no inherent advantage to any given diet for the most part at a population level. There is an inherent advantage to eating more raw vegetables, up to about 3/4 of a pound a day, from what we've seen in research so far. And there is a benefit to having kind of like the rainbow diet that I spoke about.
Right.
And
Right.
there is a benefit to not eating too many calories. We just covered everything you need to know. Don't eat too many calories. Eat a lot of different plants, uncooked if you can. Don't eat raw potatoes. That's stupid. But, like,
Fuck. No.
I'm just saying, right?
I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
It's
Yeah.
it's
I'm like, fuck.
yeah, I know. It's like, oh, I've been doing that for years.
Yeah.
It's
This
like a year.
explains my weakness.
Dude, you hate yourself more than I hate myself. I'll tell you that. And that's saying
Yeah.
something, because I'll eat
Yeah.
a lot of shit. But
I know. This guy made me do curls with freaking
God.
blood
Yes.
pressure cuffs on both my arms, pumped to 180 millimeter mercury or something, and then do curls for like 10 minutes. That's what he made me do. That's what this guy made
that's
me
a
do.
gross misinterpretation of what actually happened. But
What
it is still
happened?
miserable. You have to look for your.
It was the most painful experience
Yeah.
in my life. I'll
It's
tell you that.
terrible.
And
Yeah.
I've suffered pain.
It's not
But that was
fun.
painful.
Yes. No, occlusion training is not a good time. It's a great workaround when you can't handle heavy weights, but all things considered, it's pretty uncomfortable. And sometimes that's good. Sometimes, like, if you're
That's
getting,
an understatement.
yeah, like if you need to build up some mental toughness, like
Yeah.
for specific athletic stuff, then, that's one option that won't beat you up, but will make you absolutely miserable in ways that you're not prepared for. And
I'm happy I did it though. I'll be honest. It's good to suffer that much pain once in your life.
it is, it is, and it's also like, there's stuff we know more now. Like, apparently, and I haven't had a chance to look into this for the last 2 years or so, but there are similar benefits to just restricting blood flow right after a workout. Like if you, did your curls or whatever, and then just put the cuff on and just, did some venous occlusion for like 10 minutes, you get similar benefits. It's a hell of a lot less uncomfortable to do that.
Sounds 10 times better.
Yeah. So those are, again, are specialty things that really they don't seem to offer like a significant advantage for the average person. I would say no advantage. But
Yeah,
some people
in
feel
context.
cool. And actually, for calisthenics in particular, I think it's there's some real problems that people are not going to think of. Is that with the congestion, you do get a better pump in the muscles, and that's a problem because when you're doing straight arm stuff, that's a lot more tension on the bicep tendon attachments,
You're going to
and you're at a higher risk of hurting yourself. Yeah. So like there.
I mean, you're not supposed to do a planche after that, right?
Fuck
I mean,
no.
No, I mean, but
Absolutely
does
not.
that pump hold up? Like, how long does a pump like
I mean,
that?
I don't know. That's a hard question to answer too.
Yeah, I know. That's why I'm asking it.
I mean, you'd have to find out for yourself.
No, thank you.
honestly,
I don't want to
it's
get injured.
yeah. I mean, I would say at least 10, 20 minutes, and honestly, it may be longer. It could be hours. I mean,
Yo, guys, you heard it here from Labco Fitness first. If you're going on a date and you want big biceps, occlusion training.
if you want your veins to stick out and look really gnarly, you can definitely do that.
Occlusion training.
Occlusion training will do
right
it.
before your date.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
just
you're
it's
sweating.
really
You're like, hey, babe, big arms.
it's really important to make sure you only do that on one arm and make sure that's the arm you're going to shake her hand with, or his hand, or whoever you're going to meet, so that you can just be like, it's really nice to meet you, and it's like, just like, really, you're not saying anything, but it looks like this is your masturbation arm,
Yeah. You basically confirmed all her fears.
Yeah, exactly. Don't do that. But if you do, tell me about it, because I want to laugh.
Yeah, just call in and we'll have a nice chat with you.
Offer some life coaching.
Let's do answer some questions from the community.
Okay.
So I have one from Philip Lanson. He says, "Hi guys, I've binged the podcast like a Netflix series while walking the dog. Really good stuff. I've been following your advice with nutrition. I'm going for high protein plus a 20% caloric surplus, and I can often get my protein goal, but I struggle with getting my caloric surplus." And he says his is between 3,000 to 3,600. I have set reminders on my phone to snack more throughout the day. And the question is, what are some good calorie-rich, nutrient-dense snacks that are easy to make and prepare for a busy person? Josh, you're a busy person. What should he do?
Nuts.
Yo, you're right. Nuts.
Thank you.
Nuts.
They're the easiest thing I can think of. I mean, like, a little handful of nuts is like 120, 150 calories. They don't really fill you up. They don't go bad. You can literally carry them in your pocket. I mean,
Clean pockets, hopefully.
yeah. And, the other cool thing about them is that a lot of nuts are salted. And if you're doing a lot of stuff and sweating a lot, sometimes you need some extra salt in your diet. If you got blood pressure problems that are salt responsive, you should not do that and should just use the unsalted nuts. But for most people, it's either a non-issue or it might actually help them. So, plus they taste better, in my opinion. Not everybody agrees with that, but I like salt.
I like them too, but it got to be a little bit. It depends on what countries. I know you Americans salt a lot. You
that's
guys
a good
salt
point.
a lot.
That's a good point.
I was in 2014. We were eating chips, you and I. You guys have a significant higher amount of salt in your chips.
Now, I think, did we get those rolled up ones that were supposed to be spicy?
Yeah,
dude, those were so salty. That was ridiculous. That was something
with
else. That's not normal.
With every bite, I was already hitting my daily salt intake.
I'm telling you, like, sponsored by Big Pharma. Eat these, get blood pressure, take our meds. I mean,
Jesus.
It's not how it works, people. But I'm just saying they were very salty.
Yeah,
like,
that was really salty.
Even for me, those were uncomfortably salty. And
I kept eating
eat
them.
Salt, dude. Like, I'll put like a quarter teaspoon of just like sea salt in my mouth. Like,
they found a way to compress salt. They found a way to compress salt to fit more into a amount of volume. Truly, there's no other way.
Capsule core is real.
Yeah, right. All right, let's go on to the next question by Tommaso Cazzaniga.
Yeah, these.
He says,
I'm holding up a bag of Blue Diamond habanero almonds. Don't be scared. They're not that hot, but they do taste really good.
You got to send me some of those, man.
Yeah, man.
I like those stuff.
Dude, the habaneros I grew this year were so freaking hot. They were delicious, though. They're really good.
I got to visit again, man.
You do, man. We're moving the garden. It's going to be in a better spot. Like, there's some cool stuff. I got like piles and you got so many raspberries. I actually have a mutant raspberry and a mutant hot pepper that I'm the only person in the world probably that has it because it was a mutant that happened in my garden. It's really cool.
You had two things happen at the same time?
Yeah, in the 1 year. Well,
that's rare.
So in the blue...
There's something around that air, bro. I'm telling you, man. The sun, maybe there's some ozone missing.
I had help. I think I had help because there's my raspberry plant came up out of the compost bed that my blueberries are growing in. And that was all horse compost, so it's all horse poop and wood shavings. And somebody somewhere ate some kind of a raspberry and it passed through them, and that thing sprouted, and it was coming up, and I just saw it, and I was like, I'm just gonna let it grow. I don't know what the hell that is, and so I got two of them. One of them is super, super, super spiky. It has no raspberries on it yet. It's gonna have to overwinter. I'm gonna let it fruit next year, and if it's really good, then maybe I'll put up with the spines. But the other one is completely thornless. It makes big, fairly light flavored berries. Like they have a good flavor to them. They're not very tart. So
Hmm.
like I like tart raspberries more, but these things are really good. Like they got a really nice bright flavor to them. They hold really well. They had zero disease. Like I mean, they did not get moldy. I mean, they're amazing and the berries are pretty
Maybe they
large.
contain antibiotics,
And the
dude.
way that
You
it
don't know.
grows God. And the way that it grows is really interesting. Like I have to take a picture. It's not like any of the other raspberries that I have. It's a very unique plant, and it's like very compact for the amount
Hmm.
of fruit that it makes. So I'm pretty excited about it. Like it's
That's
a
awesome. I didn't
yeah.
know gardening could be that exciting.
It can be sometimes, not all the
Yeah.
time. The other one, like I had these little hot peppers that one of the nurses, her husband had started like 10 plants or something, and they just
Hmm.
had hot peppers out of their ears. So she was like,
Mm.
yo, I know you like hot peppers. Can I just give you one of my husband's plants? And I was like, yeah, that'd be freaking awesome. So she gave it to
Awesome.
me. So I brought it home. I grew peppers. And then eventually the plants started kind of giving out on me. And the I'd saved I still got peppers from that plant. So anyhow, I saved a bunch of the seeds and I said, well, I'll just make some new plants. I mean, duh. So I did. And I started, don't ask me why, but I started 24 hot pepper plants. One of them
Jesus.
was a weirdo.
Yeah, you're bound to have a weirdo if
I
you plant
guess.
24.
I mean, that was just but it's not it's not a little bit weird. It's totally different. Like 23 of those plants, they are all the same pepper. And then this
Hmm.
one, it's like um it's the size of my index finger. Like the peppers are huge comparatively. Like, these are like those super small, skinny peppers that are like maybe I don't know 3 or 4 centimeters long and like 4 millimeters wide. I mean, they're really small. And
Yeah.
then somehow I got like a 2 centimeter wide by like I don't know 15 centimeter. Maybe that's too long. Probably 8
15 is
centimeter.
like
That's huge.
6 inches.
Yeah, I was like, that's a pretty big pepper. These are probably like 3 to 4 inches by like a half to 3/4 of an inch wide. I mean,
Hmm.
they're good
Hmm.
sized peppers. And I mean, this plant like grew up and fell over and crushed like four other plants. I mean, this thing was just a beast, and it was fucking covered in peppers, man, all over the place. So many, and they were not super hot. They actually were sweet until I got about halfway up, and then the spice started coming in, and
Oh, it's one of those delayed spice attackers.
no, it's like it's not a delayed spice. It's like the spice is just only in the top half of the pepper. I don't know why. Like as you get closer to the
Oh,
seeds,
that's really deceiving, dude. You
yes,
can
it
have like your
is.
friends be like, "Oh, this is
Yeah,
great," and then they keep
dude.
eating, and they're like, "Oh my god, I'm
And a
dying."
lot of them they're dry. It dries really well.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's a cool pepper. I don't know. I mean, it just was a total random deal. So I brought the plant inside, and I killed the soil with hydrogen peroxide with a diluted
Hmm.
hydrogen peroxide, and then repopulated it just to kill pest eggs and things like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Like I don't want a bunch of fungus gnats. And then uh, it's doing great. It's putting out a bunch of peppers and stuff. I mean, like it's starting to have some blossoms. It's just now kind of getting over its transplant shock a little bit. But anyhow, you will have a lot of cool stuff. We got some great places to shoot our bows, and
Awesome, dude.
there's a horse trail going around the property, and it's beautiful here.
I can't wait, man. Yeah.
And
Um,
and we have like a whole cow.
you have a cow?
I don't know if it's halal certified, but we can get halal
Uh,
meat.
but wait, is it still living?
No,
Oh, okay, never
it's
mind. I was
vacuum
like,
sealed.
okay, okay, okay. That's
Hmm.
awesome, though, dude.
It was $3.50 a pound for I think it was like 600 pounds of meat.
dude, you're set.
Yeah, for a while.
That's like how long
That's less than half
worth
the
of?
price of meat in the store. That's like
Wait,
cheaper
how
than
long
the
could
ground
you?
beef right now.
How long would your family be set with that?
Ooh, I'd guess probably a year for the four of us. It's a long time. That might be longer than that. We don't eat
And
that
that is
much meat
no, but
anymore.
yeah, you don't eat only that meat. There's chicken too, yeah, like
Yeah,
or no meat. So yeah,
yeah.
you're probably set for 2 years, years
It
even
might be. I
maybe.
mean, it's going to be a while. We're going to bring like probably 100 pounds of it down to Georgia for my in-laws, so they can put it in
Mhm.
their freezer and have some
Yeah,
meat for a while.
that's
Yeah, it's a
awesome.
killer. Yeah, a friend of ours runs cattle, and so we just bought from her, and the way it works is you buy the cow, and then you send. So now you own the cow, and then you send your cow to the butcher.
Yeah.
That's it.
Okay. Let's move on to the questions again. This question's pretty interesting for you because
Hmm.
it's directed to you,
Okay.
Josh.
Whoa.
What are your thoughts about TRT with bioidentical hormones, assuming one's vitamin D and other related nutrients are in check, of course?
Yeah. So for people who don't know, TRT is hormone replacement therapy, specifically testosterone replacement therapy. Okay. Um, I think that if we're talking about like bioidentical testosterone, that's might not be the best idea. The reason is that testosterone's got a really short half life, really
Hmm.
short, like minutes to hours. You know, the reason that anabolic steroids are made is so that they last for like a week. Um, I think that number one, we have to. There's no point in replacing something that is already in your body, right? So if you have normal testosterone levels,
Levels. Hmm.
um, then I don't think you should do it. I think that the first thing you should do is make sure that your exercise is on point and that you're not doing too much, that your sleep is good. You might consider having a sleep study because a lot of people don't know they have sleep apnea, and that can get you in ways that you don't expect.
Hmm.
Um, I'd make sure that you have like a moderate amount of fat in your diet. Have it evenly split between monounsaturated, polyunsaturated, and saturated. You know, um, like simple things, you'd be really surprised at how big of a difference getting those things in line makes for people's testosterone levels. Having said that, if you're in your 50s or something and you've done all those things and you're kind of feeling some kind of way and your numbers aren't the best, then I think that it's fine. I mean, the key here is that you don't want to target like a super high level. Like labs will say that normal's anywhere from like, 250 nanograms per deciliter to like 1200, depending on the lab that you look at. That's fucking high. 1200 is like
Hmm.
steroid levels, um, like low dose, but still, um, you know, the, like I know mine range from like in the 400s to the 700s, depending on how well I'm eating and
You're pretty
sleeping.
manly.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the thank you. I appreciate that. Been feeling insecure, but that fixed it.
Yeah, I mean,
But seriously, I mean, it's you know, there there's a friend of mine in Columbus, Georgia, Bill. He is a respiratory therapist. First off, this guy is so gifted physically, it's bananas. You'd never guess, but like, he's 50 years old and he looks better than any of us. I mean, it's
no.
crazy. Like there's something different about him. And there always has been. He's always just been buff. And, you know, he's just like, you know, 50-year-old white dude, has a little beard, like super nice guy. Um, and he is just like wrapped in muscle. It's nuts. And he started doing testosterone replacement therapy, I think like 2 years before I met him. Because we were talking about it. And I was just like, I forget how this came up, but we became friends. He gave me one of his old Captains of Crush grippers.
Mhm.
Because he's like, I don't use it. I really can't close it. I overestimated my grip strength. It's a number 2. Like, it's just been sitting around. Do you want it? And I said, sure. So now it's in the gym. Um, and, uh, he, I think it's like one shot a week, and he feels good with his testosterone at like 500. He feels just like he always used to. We're not.
Mhm.
It does not take massive levels to feel good, and you will not necessarily feel better with a higher number.
Right.
You just need to be where your body likes to be. Um, and it's like he didn't look any different. I mean, he same as always. It just made him feel better. And you know, that's not nothing. It's a low dose. It is pretty low risk. Um, so I think that in the right situation, if you really, if you've already done all the things and it hasn't fixed it, then the next step is medicine. That's the greatest thing about living in this day and age, is that you don't have to just like feel like shit for the rest of your life or die from like lack of thyroid hormone or something.
Mhm.
You can take a pill or get a shot and go about life just like you always have. And that's an amazing thing. It's it's up to you whether you take advantage of that or not. There are lots of things that people do that are dishonest and that are going to hurt them. Like, there's a bunch of people who will like stay up for days on end and be sleep deprived and like go beat off 20 times and then run to the doctor and get a test and be like, oh look, my testosterone's like 180. I'll go, yeah, you just fucking half dead. you know and some people will write them a prescription, and they do that to try and get legal steroids. And that's stupid. That's Why would you do that? But there are people who do it. I strongly discourage that. You're only going to hurt yourself. You could put yourself in a situation to where you're 20, 30 years old and your body can't make its own testosterone anymore. That would be terrible. You would be dependent
Mhm.
on doctors for the rest of your life. That's stupid. It's like actively self-destructive, but sometimes people don't see it that way in the moment. And that's, to me, that's kind of like mental illness. And like, there's nothing wrong with having that issue, but it's important to recognize it and do something about it you know
Yeah.
so
No,
that's
I
my
think that
answer, is that,
covers. Yeah.
yeah, if you have a proper medical indication, then getting appropriate treatment is fine. And you
Of course.
shouldn't be like, oh, but am I going to be a cheater? Look, nobody gives a shit.
Do I keep my natty status, bro?
Yeah, who cares?
Yeah.
There's a bunch of internet bros who will shit on your grave and not why do you care what they think? They're not your family, they're not your friends, they're not you. They don't live your life, they don't know what you're feeling, they don't know how you've changed. And
Mhm.
and neither do I. So I think that if there's a good reason and it's legit, you should do it. you know and if not, don't.
Awesome. I
I
think that wraps up that question. Yeah. No, no. It's definitely one of those interesting things, and I wonder what I will
Yeah,
do when I'm 50.
yeah,
I'm
I don't
pretty
know, I
sure
mean,
that I'm pretty sure I will once if
yeah,
my testosterone's too low, bro.
why not?
I will get treated for that.
Yeah,
Simple as that. You know.
yep, yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I mean, you know when you start feeling off, go get checked out. But
Simple as that.
yeah, it's gonna be a long time from now.
Yeah. Anyway, guys, that was it for this podcast. We talked
Mhm.
about we covered a lot of
Yeah.
subjects today.
I actually,
Actually.
the last thing I'd like to do, and this is a pretty quick one, just since it's up on my
Right.
screen, I was looking at the lab, and one of the guys was asking, and I think this is a question that's
Hmm.
pretty generally applicable, so I just want to put it out there. So,
Hmm.
since gyms are closed right now, I plan on running a cutting phase. I don't really know what gyms closed has to do with that, but cool. So
Hmm.
for my vertical pull movement, I would like to do pull-ups. The thing is,
Right.
I can only do 4 in a row. I just tested.
Hmm.
Nowhere near the 10 to 20 for a secondary movement and not super close to the 6 to 10 for the primary. Should I
Hmm.
run the program doing negatives instead to build up the strength? Or like what would be the recommended course of action? I do not have bands or anything, but I can order some if need be, if assisted pull-ups would be better. Thanks.
Right.
So here's the deal. Um, you know, there sometimes you need to build up enough strength to make good use of a mass cycle. Sometimes you need a mass cycle to do better in your next strength cycle. These things all feed into each other, and it's why there's a kind of a set rotation for doing things. And the short version is, first off, to me, 4 reps is pretty darn close to 6 reps.
Hmm.
The point here is just that it's not so much about the numbers. It's more about you want to do something that is, you know, harder for you, that's going to keep you on the lower end of the effective rep range for that primary movement.
Hmm.
So, what I would do is cluster sets. You don't need to do all your reps in a row. You can do 2 pull-ups, hop down, breathe for 15 seconds, do 1 or 2 more pull-ups, hop down, breathe for 15 seconds, and do 1 or 2 more. And then that's your set. And so there are a lot of reasons. There's some new research that's really like uncovering some of the reasons why this may be more effective for strength. And that's something that'll be fun to do as kind of a research review, because that's something that Yaad and I have talked about
Yeah.
getting going, and we'll tell you guys more as that materializes.
Hmm.
But the practical approach here is that uh, you know there's nothing wrong with getting bands, but there is something wrong with cheating yourself out of building strength.
Hmm.
And when you're first getting started, you know, I think that the bands are great for like a secondary movement, but not so like for what I would do in this situation, this is just me, is I would be doing probably 3 sets of those clusters of like, 5 or 6 pull-ups in a cluster. And and then what I would do after that is I would probably do banded pull-ups for 10 to 15 reps. You know, it's a different exercise. It really is. It's not quite the same as doing a regular pull-up. And that's cool. Like, if you're trying to do a heavier exercise and a lighter exercise, one, that's not strictly necessary. But if you're going to do that to try and get the strength and the mass, and that's reasonable, um, then don't steal that strength work away from your body.
Hmm.
Use something like a cluster set to do it. And that just means that you say, I'm going to do 6 reps this set, but you don't have to do them all in a row. You're allowed to take short breaks. In fact, you have to take short breaks. That's what makes it a cluster. Is you're going to do 1 or 2 and then take a very short break, like 15 seconds, and then do 1 or 2 and take a very short break, and then do 1 or 2, and so on
Right.
until you reach the goal for that cluster. And it keeps the work quality high. It gives you more volume with a heavier load. And both of those things are really important. Your body doesn't really care that much about, the so-called like sustained time under tension. And I'm glossing over some things and leaving a lot of stuff unspoken here on purpose, but I just want to drive basic concepts right
Hmm.
now. Do the work, use the simple exercise, use the pull-up, and do the clusters. I don't know that I would really even worry about I would rather see somebody do like, higher rep body rows instead of trying to do another vertical pull, you know? Like I I would stay kind of specific for my pulling strength, in this situation, and build that pull up, you know, use something that's very different to get higher rep work in because you're not going to interfere with the motor pattern, you know? And that's kind of the deal is that the the way that your body recruits the muscles for high reps and for low reps is fairly similar in a resistance training environment. And so the difference is that you're going to build more strength with that lower rep approach, especially if you're taking frequent rests inside the set, because you're going to get more work with a heavier weight that way. And you're also, it's not just about getting more work. Those rest periods seem to have a significant effect on myosin heavy chain subtype expression. And I'll get into that on the research review. But there are multiple reasons why it works. The most important thing is that we've known this works for decades, it's been used for a long time. But now we're starting to learn why, so we can justify the use, which is really important. And we may find out, just like with muscle damage, it turns out that rather than direct mechanic, and this was something that always bothered me, I just couldn't put my finger on it. Um, you have to work with what you have. And this is why science is so important to understand as a process, not as a book. It's,
Hmm.
science is a way to find truth. It's really the only way to reliably look for truth. Um, but, and I should say objective,
Yeah.
repeatable information, which reflects reality. Truth is technically whatever you believe is right. So maybe
Right.
truth's not the best word. But in terms of figuring out what's really going on, science is a process. And so a couple of years ago, there was some research that didn't really make it out. I haven't seen a whole lot about this, but I keep up with a lot of the big people in our industry, and they're not all my favorite for everything. Just like I'm not going to be anybody's favorite for everything. There's certain things that I'm really good at. There's certain things that these other guys are really good at. And Chris Beardsley is a PhD in sports science. I forget what university. He's got a really great website. I think that one of the dangers, if I can say it like that, it's a little dramatic, is that it's real easy to drown in data and get overwhelmed. But he does a good job of breaking down individual things and making really good infographics. And so we got into a conversation a couple of months ago, and I remember I asked a particular question because I said, what you said here makes sense except for this part. And then he was like, the thing is that muscle damage, what we know now is that it's actually an enzymatic issue. It's not like caused directly by tension. And so that is something, at least with like direct strength training. And that's something that's really important to understand. And that really does play into that really like moments. So there's a lot of enzymes that are kind of like inactive sitting around, and changes in the environment, whether it's pH shifts or more calcium ions or more phosphorus ions, like when you're burning ATP, they activate under these particular conditions. And the the muscle damage essentially is coming from, at least in terms of excitation, contraction, coupling, and
Hmm.
uh, likely just in general, is coming from essentially calcium channels, active and passive, that are in the neuromuscular junction. Um, I realize it's a lot of technical stuff.
Yeah.
The point here is that um, there's a big difference in what you experience between having a hose spraying into your mouth for 30 seconds straight versus having a
Hmm.
hose, the same hose, spraying into your mouth for 3 seconds with a 15-second break 10 times in a row.
Hmm.
One essentially drowns you, and the other one you know, is much, 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 much easier to deal with. You're just not as stressed out
Mhm.
because you have 15 seconds to breathe in between. And
Right.
that's kind of what I'm getting at, is that even though the total, like you say, both
Volume.
conditions, yeah, the total volume of water sprayed into your mouth is the same, the conditions are very different. And so your experience is very different. Your panic levels are very different. The likelihood of you actually drowning is very different. Of getting water in your lungs is very different. So the and the what I'm trying to get at here is that the intracellular environment, the way that chemical gradients work, there's a huge difference in peak and area under the curve when you have a sustained 30-second contraction versus 10 3-second contractions spread apart. And what we don't know yet is whether whether the sustained contraction is better for mass. We do know that it is inferior for strength. Um, and the nice thing, though, that you have to understand, and this is for the benefit of my background, both in medicine and exercise science, and really just being a total nerd about reading everything and talking to these people kind of all the time, is that the way that gene expression works is highly variable. And so we constitutively, all of our muscles express type 2x myosin heavy chains, which is the fastest, most powerful force production heavy chain that we have in humans, at least in skeletal muscle. Um, the That's always being expressed. But when you do exercise, you start encoding for 2A as well. Well, the way that gene expression works is that you kind of have like a start tag and then like a lead in and then the actual protein code. And that space in between was for many, many decades officially written off as like, oh, it's junk. It doesn't matter. There's nothing there. But that's wrong. It does not make the it does not code for a protein, but it does actually have knockout. So what it does is like you have like the 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 messenger RNA that is out there that's like, okay, this is instructions for making type 2X. And what it does is it's got little chunks of interference RNA. It's like a it's like a spider web, you could think of. It's like Spider-Man's out there and it's just like bloop, you got webbed. You're stuck now. You can't do anything. Screw you. You know, it ties it up. It makes it unable to enter the protein factories. So it can't enter the ribosomes. The binding zones to start transcription or translation rather are blocked. And so those are called knockout RNAs. And when you are doing endurance exercise, you are triggering the transcription of your more endurance oriented myosin heavy chains. And one of the unavoidable things that happens with that is that you're also generating knockout RNA for the type 2X. And so understanding how these things work and understanding diffusion gradients and the time courses that these things happen in and the important differences between pulses and a sustained signal, it really makes a lot of sense why the cluster set method does produce better strength gains for a given volume of work in the same period of time.
Mhm.
Um, what we don't know is whether there is a disadvantage in mass gains.
Yeah.
So it adds some time. It doesn't add a huge amount of time, but it adds
Mhm.
time. So it's not always appropriate. It's certainly not the most efficient thing, but it does add effectiveness. And I think that, these are things that as we start looking at, like, and I've been talking to Sebastian and explaining some of this stuff and seeing, like for him and Olaf, as big as they are, as strong as they are now, I think that at this point in time, for a while anyways, they just need to be focusing on a slightly different strategy that takes them the rest of the way to where they're trying to get. And the strength cycles are a natural transition into this. And It's just kind of taking it a step further for people as they get there, because they really aren't going to benefit a whole lot from large muscle group mass gain. Um, there may be some very specific areas where it would be worth targeting, but you know, I can't say that I think that it's that important for them anymore.
Hmm.
You know, and everybody who trains long enough consistently will get there. Um, but it's like in the beginning, this does not apply to somebody who's just starting out, who's only been working out for like a year or something, and are still really nowhere close. Not just, it's not about having as much muscle as you can have, but it's like, okay, you're clearly not big enough to do the things that you say you want to do. You know, like there's going to be times where it's better to just let's build some mass on you. And then what's going to happen is your body's going to maintain that mass. But over the course of the next couple of months, if we do this cluster set strength cycle type deal, then, you know, you can take all that mass that you built and transform it into much stronger muscle. And that's kick ass. Like that's what you want from periodization. That's why you
Hmm.
use it. And then the really cool thing is that now you're stronger. Guess what? Volume is the most important thing in gaining mass, but what's the second most important thing? Resistance. So if you can use more resistance, guess what? You're going to get even better results from your next mass cycle. And that has now been shown to be the case in research as well as in the gym also.
No,
S-
that's very interesting. Yeah.
it is. And that's why, like, you
Yeah.
know, these simple questions, you know, a lot of times I think people kind of get frustrated and they're like, duh, but it's like, you know what? There's a lot of
So,
knowledge to be gained
yeah.
by understanding the answer and not just saying, oh, okay, just cluster sets. Like there's a reason, and all of this stuff is always behind the scenes and people don't see it
Hmm.
because it takes many years, I think, to get to where you can take all of this in stride and just say, oh, okay, I get it. Cool. You know?
Yeah.
But we could put it all together and say, you know what? Right now, I just want you to get stronger, because if we get you stronger, then you're going to be able to gain mass better. You're still going to gain mass. It's not like you're not going to get bigger.
Right.
So let's focus on your pull up as the only, no secondary for the vertical for this guy, only primary for him. And then for high reps, he should just do horizontal pulls. It's a totally different movement. And he is going to have a totally different recruitment pattern. And will it interfere to some degree? Probably. But does that matter? No. He's getting a combined response. It's going to be better than it would have been if he had just tried one or the other at this point in his training career. Because anybody who can only do 4 pull-ups is nowhere close to their potential. And
Hmm.
that's really exciting. That means that there is so much magic that's going to happen for this particular Spencer, you know, because of where I'm assuming it's a guy, it's where he's at in, you know, his development as an athlete. And
Right.
that's a wonderful time to be in, because if you just don't overdo it and you do the things and you eat, you're like, man, this is cool. I'm getting strong quick. Like this rules, you know?
Hmm.
And it also, he doesn't need a super complicated program. He just needs to have one vertical pull that he does for maybe like you know, 3 to 5 sets, maybe like twice a week. And then, you know, he can do some lighter horizontal rowing, more specifically for, like, to me, that was really not so much for the lats. It's really more about just the scapular musculature. And that's all the pulling he needs. I wouldn't have him do anything else, you know? I'd probably do something very similar for like planche work, as I would probably just do something similar for his pseudo planche push-ups, and then have him do some sort of overhead work with higher reps, and that's it. Like keep it really simple. You don't need a lot of different things, especially in the beginning. There's kind of like this middle zone where sometimes that's beneficial, but I think that we overdo it sometimes, and I think that, you know, could you get extra work, like, or some extra gains out of that? Yes, but if you're spending twice the time for 10% extra gains, is it worth it?
Yeah.
It sometimes it is, but for most of our members, I don't think that it is. And
Which is full circle back to the first thing we talked
yeah,
about.
exactly, which gets back
Yeah.
to the whole optimal thing. And
Right.
that's a dynamic thing. It's not like a set in stone deal. It's kind of like with, there's a set in stone way to squat right, but it leads to a different squat form for everybody. And people say, "No way, man." Well, fuck you. Here's what it is. Don't seriously though. Do not twist in your knee intentionally while you squat.
Mhm.
Do not intentionally try to get rid of lower back movement during your squat. And so what you have to do is you find the right amount of width between your heels and the amount of turnout. So basically you
Mhm.
get your stance in a way that allows you to use the range of motion that you want to do, ideally at least getting to parallel. It's not about getting as low as you can, but you want to be able to get to parallel. And between where the bar sits and how your feet are set up, if you do that right, then you're not going to twist in your knee. You are going to hit parallel and you're going to see great growth all over your lower body from your ass to your quads. And that's it. And it's going to look different in every single person because some people's hip sockets point really far forward and they're going to have a really narrow stance. And other people's hips point really far out and they're going to have a really
Mhm.
wide stance. And that's normal. That's fine. That's like that's why you don't want to copy what you see just because your favorite athlete does it that way.
Right.
It's better to understand what the goal of the movement is and then say, okay, how does that apply to my body?
Exactly.
Right. And that's when you're doing it blind, that's terrifying. But once you understand that really all you need to do is spend like 5 minutes in the doorway doing my doorway squat drill and figuring out your stance. Ideally, you start off with Dr. Stuart McGill's quadruped squat assessment. I have a little hack
Mhm.
for that. But if I can be so bold and use that stupid term, hack, put your feet up against a wall so that your your hips and your ankles can relax, so that you can
Mhm.
actually like simulate a real squat stance, and then move back and like figure out what your how what actually works for your hips. And then when you kind of figured it out a little bit, get in a doorway, practice it, and then get under a bar. It's really quick. You can teach yourself how to do a wonderful squat for your body in like a week, and sometimes in a day. And and you have to be, and and at that point, it's like it becomes easy. Every now and again, you run into somebody like my ex who needed like 6 weeks to get down to parallel. Her body
Mhm.
fought her, but she was in the right position. We verified that. It's just her body was weird. And we said, you know what? Don't worry about it. Go down to that spot where you feel like it's all starting to fall apart. Stop just before that. Hold it for a few seconds. Get comfortable there. And you know what? Every single week she got better, better, better. And then she was doing squats to parallel. And then
Mhm.
she was, like a year later, she was deadlifting like 200 something pounds and she was doing weighted pull ups with like, 35 extra pounds. And, this is a girl who couldn't do a pull up a year
All right,
before.
man.
So,
That's
not
yeah.
not gifted, just willing to be consistent and did not try to push too hard. And and discovered a whole
Yeah.
new meaning in life. Like, it was the first time in her life that she felt like she could take care of herself. Didn't need other people to grab heavy bags and stuff. It was very
Mhm.
liberating, and she's a very independent woman. And like that's that all came just from understanding hips and knees. That was it. It unlocked a whole new world, and we can do the same thing for our members through very simple the application of proper principles. And that's really what the whole optimal thing is about, is like understanding what you're looking for, what's available to you right now, and just in recognizing that it's okay to not be a pro athlete. Like, that's not necessary to be successful.
All right, guys. That was the end of the podcast. We again covered a lot of stuff. And stay tuned for many more episodes. Again, like I mentioned before, we're doing podcasts more frequently, and we will cover a lot more of your questions, and we will cover topics that we think is important and what you guys think is important. So thank you, Josh, for being with me here today to have this great podcast.
Yeah, man. Thank you. Thank
And
everybody. Really appreciate everybody's audience, like everybody in the audience who's listening to us. Thank you for tuning in.
right. All right, guys. Have a good one, and I'll see you in the next podcast.
See you
Later.
later.